I never intended to investigate the Vatican archives. I started with architectural manuals, boring academic work tracing how 19th century builders constructed domes. Then I found the citations, dozens of them, hundreds, all pointing to texts that should exist in the Vatican archives but don't, not lost, missing. A lost document burns in a fire or crumbles with age. A missing document leaves evidence it once existed, catalogue numbers, cross-references, correspondence between scholars discussing its contents, and then vanishes. The Vatican Apostolic Archive, they called it the Secret Archive until 2019, before the rebrand, is full of these ghosts. Technical treatises on resonance and geometry, manuscripts from Central Asian expeditions, architectural blueprints that multiple sources reference but no researcher can access. Here's what broke the official story for me. Vatican correspondence from 1890 mentions these texts, librarians discussing them, cardinals requesting them, active documents in active use. By 1902, every reference stops. Not a gradual fade, an abrupt silence. 12 years. This raises a vital question. What happened between 1890 and 1902 that required the systematic erasure of technical knowledge from the world's most comprehensive archive? And when I started tracing where those texts came from, what they contained, why they mattered, the same word kept appearing in the margins of old inventories, in expedition logs, in missionary reports: Tartaria. It started with a single footnote. I was researching 19th century cartography. Mundane work, really, when I came across a reference in a French missionary's journal from 1863. He mentioned delivering volumes of historical interest recovered from the ruins of Samarkand to the Vatican delegation in Constantinople. Standard procedure for the era. Religious orders often sent artifacts, manuscripts, and curiosities back to Rome. But here's the thing. Those volumes don't appear in any Vatican catalogue. Not in the published inventories, not in the suppressed ones that occasionally leak. Not anywhere. I checked 3 times. I contacted archivists. I submitted formal research requests through academic channels. The response was always the same. No record of any such delivery. The missionary's journal itself, preserved in the French National Archives, simply ends 6 months after that entry. No explanation, no death certificate, no further correspondence. As if he'd never existed after mentioning those volumes. And that's where Tartaria becomes impossible to ignore. If you're intrigued by what you're hearing, consider subscribing. This investigation goes places most documentarians won't touch, and your support helps keep this research independent and unrestricted. Let me be clear, I'm not claiming Tartaria was a vast empire that controlled half the world. I'm not saying they had free energy or that they built every ornate structure on Earth, but something existed. Multiple 18th and 19th century maps label enormous swaths of Central Asia as Tartary or Grand Tartary or Independent Tartary, not as mythological spaces, as real acknowledged territories. The Encyclopedia Britannica from 1771 devotes significant space to describing the region's peoples, customs, and governance structures. Travel accounts reference it, diplomatic records mention it, and then, sometime in the mid-1800s, it vanishes from the historical record with almost surgical precision. No gradual decline documented in newspapers, no transition period where it becomes something else. No archaeological excavations of its capital cities, no detailed accounts of its political dissolution. Just silence. The official explanation that Tartary was merely a European catch-all term for poorly understood Asian territories collapses when you examine the specificity of those earlier descriptions. They're not vague gestures toward the East. They describe governmental structures, trade relationships, architectural styles, multiple sources across multiple nations using consistent terminology. Then nothing. And the Vatican, which documented everything, which has records of obscure heresies, minor diplomatic incidents, and theological debates about how many angels can dance on a pin, has almost nothing substantial about this massive territory during the exact period when Catholic missions were expanding aggressively into Asia. Why? The Vatican Archive's card catalogue system was created in the late 19th century. Before that, finding anything required working with manuscript inventories, handwritten lists maintained by archivists over centuries. Several of these inventories still exist, and they reference documents that no longer appear in the modern catalogue. One inventory from 1847 mentions a collection titled Asiatica Orientalis Varia, Eastern Asian Miscellany, spanning 73 bound volumes. The entry notes they contain maps, architectural documents and texts in various unknown scripts delivered from missions in the Tartar territories. I found the inventory entry. I found multiple cross-references to it in other administrative documents, but the collection itself, gone. Not catalogued as lost, not listed as damaged in the various fires and disasters that have affected the archives, not transferred to another institution, simply absent from the record, as if the inventory itself were mistaken, as if 73 volumes of material from Central Asia never existed in the first place. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. A Jesuit correspondence log from 1789 references volumes of technical drawings recovered from ruined cities beyond the Caspian. No further details about content, but multiple letters discuss their transport to Rome. The volumes never appear in any subsequent catalogue. A Papal Advisory Committee report from 1834 mentions examination of astronomical texts acquired from Siberian monasteries demonstrating mathematical sophistication exceeding contemporary European knowledge. The texts themselves not in the archive. An administrative note from 1856 records the reorganization of materials related to Central Asian civilizations into restricted access. What materials? Where did they go? The note provides no inventory, no classification system, no follow-up documentation. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's where it gets stranger. The Vatican itself, the buildings, the basilica, the systematic layout, contains architectural elements that appear in structures across Europe, Russia and Central Asia with suspicious uniformity. Not similar styles, identical proportional systems, identical acoustic engineering, identical load-bearing techniques that shouldn't exist, with the construction methods officially attributed to their eras. St. Peter's Basilica was supposedly designed by Renaissance architects working with period-appropriate tools and knowledge. Yet its dome, completed in 1590, demonstrates harmonic resonance engineering that modern acousticians struggle to replicate. Stand in specific positions, whisper, and your voice carries across impossible distances with perfect clarity. Not echoes, not amplification. Targeted acoustic transmission using architectural geometry. The same phenomenon appears in the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg, in the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, in civic buildings across Siberia that supposedly post-date these more advanced European structures. All of them. The same engineering, the same mathematical precision, the same sophisticated understanding of sound propagation through stone, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. And the Vatican has no surviving architectural blueprints for St. Peter's Dome that show this acoustic engineering. The plans attributed to Michelangelo and Della Porta show the structural framework, the visible elements, but nothing about the precise angular relationships that create the sound transmission effect. Nothing about the specific stone densities required, nothing about the mathematical ratios embedded in every measurement. How did they build it without that information? The official answer is trial and error, practical experience, the genius of Renaissance architecture. But the same trial and error producing identical results in buildings separated by thousands of miles, built by different cultures, using different construction labour, all within a relatively compressed time frame? That's not trial and error. That's a template. That's inherited knowledge. That's someone working from the same source material. Let me present this carefully, because this is where even sympathetic researchers start to back away. Between approximately 1750 and 1850, Hundreds of massive civic structures appeared across 3 continents. I'm not talking about simple buildings. I'm talking about edifices requiring millions of bricks, sophisticated foundational engineering, integrated utility systems and complex artistic programs, courthouses, train stations, hospitals, government buildings, cathedrals, exhibition halls, all of them displaying the same architectural vocabulary, the same proportional systems, the same construction quality, the same level of finish work, often the same decorative motifs, identical corbels, identical column capitals, identical window surrounds, despite supposedly being designed by different architects working in different nations under different governments. And here's the critical question: how? The official story is that this represents the spread of neoclassical and Beaux-Arts architecture through education, through published pattern books, through architects training at European academies and then carrying those lessons worldwide. Fine. Except these buildings weren't constructed by trained European architects. They were built using local labour forces, often in newly settled territories, often in cities that didn't have established architectural guilds or construction industries. They appeared in San Francisco and Melbourne and Vladivostok and Buenos Aires. How did frontier towns acquire the skilled stonemasons, the specialised tooling, the quarrying operations, the transportation infrastructure, and the organisational capacity to execute buildings that would challenge construction firms today? And why do so many of them show up in historical photographs already aged, already weathered, already surrounded by streets at basement window level, as if the ground rose around them, or as if they'd been standing there far longer than the construction dates suggest? The deeper I went into Vatican correspondence from this period, the more I found references to restoration and reorganization and re-establishment of churches in territories where Catholicism supposedly had no previous presence. Not establishment, re-establishment. The language suggests they were recovering something, not building something new. Here's what troubles me most. It's not just the Vatican. Every major archive from the period, British Library, French National Archive, Russian State Archive, Library of Congress, has similar gaps. Maps disappear, manuscripts go missing. Entire catalogue series skip numbers with no explanation, and no one talks about it. I've contacted archivists. I've spoken with historians specialising in Central Asian studies. I've reached out to architectural historians who focus on the 19th century. Most ignore the question entirely. Some provide boilerplate answers about record-keeping inconsistencies. A few become hostile, suggesting that pursuing this line of inquiry is professionally unwise. One curator, speaking off the record, told me, "Some collections are considered too sensitive for general research access, not because of their content, but because of the questions they raise." What questions? Questions about continuity, about who had what knowledge when, about whether the historical timeline we teach is as linear and complete as we claim. That was the entire conversation. They wouldn't elaborate. They wouldn't meet again. The silence was deafening. Here's what kept me awake for weeks after I noticed the pattern. Between 1850 and 1920, during the exact period when materials about Central Asia were vanishing from catalogues, archives across the world burned. Not all of them. Not randomly. Specifically, the ones that held materials related to 19th century cartography, architectural records and missionary documentation from the East. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. 1865. The Smithsonian Institution fire destroys much of its early collection, including maps and documents from Pacific and Asian expeditions. Official cause: flue malfunction. 1870. The Franco-Prussian War sees the destruction of the Imperial Library in Strasbourg. Not just war damage, deliberate burning. Among the losses, extensive collections of Napoleonic-era surveys of Central Asian territories. 1879. The library of the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences burns. Over 30,000 volumes lost, including what archivists described as irreplaceable cartographic materials from Siberian expeditions. 1884. A fire at the Copenhagen University Library destroys collections including travel accounts and geographic surveys from Danish expeditions to Asia. 1911, the New York State Library fire, 450,000 books and 270,000 manuscripts destroyed, including the largest collection of Revolutionary War-era maps and surveys in North America. Among the losses, documentation of architectural plans for civic buildings across newly settled American territories. And here's the strangest part. The Vatican Archives suffered no such catastrophe during this period. The institution that experienced the sack of Rome in 1527, that witnessed the occupation of Rome during the Napoleonic Wars, that went through Italian unification, and the loss of the Papal States, somehow their archives remained pristine throughout the exact decades when every other major repository was experiencing convenient disasters. Not fire damage, not flood damage, not war damage, not theft, nothing. Between 1850 and 1920, while materials about Central Asian civilizations were disappearing from collections worldwide, through fire, through reorganization, through administrative loss, the Vatican Archives remained suspiciously, impossibly intact, as if they knew something the other institutions didn't, as if they understood these materials needed to be preserved, just not shared. The fires destroyed the distributed copies, the redundant records, the cross-references that would have let independent researchers verify what the Vatican held. What remains is a single source of truth, held by an institution that decides who gets to ask questions and which questions deserve answers. You can call that coincidence if it helps you sleep. I can't anymore. Around 1850, something changed. The cartographic labels vanish, the encyclopedic entries stop, the missionary reports cease mentioning architectural surveys, the technical manuscripts disappear from administrative logs. It's not gradual, it's not a slow fade as European knowledge of the region improves, it's abrupt, and it coincides exactly with a period of massive urban construction worldwide, with the establishment of standardized architectural education, with the creation of national archives and museums that consolidated previously dispersed historical materials. As if someone decided, here is where the official record begins. Everything before this is either irrelevant or needs to be recontextualized. The Vatican participated in this. Pope Pius IX, reigning from 1846 to 1878, oversaw significant reorganizations of the archive. Materials were reclassified, access restrictions were formalized, entire sections were moved to restricted status, with classifications that remain in effect today. What was in those sections? We know some of it. Diplomatic correspondence with Protestant states, documents relating to the Inquisition, records of financial arrangements with European monarchies. But other materials simply vanish from inventory at this time without clear explanation, including notably substantial portions of the Asiatica collection, anything relating to Asian missions, Asian geography, Asian historical materials. Why reorganize those materials specifically? Why restrict access to historical geography? Why create opacity around missions that supposedly represented the Church's evangelical success? Unless the content contradicted the story they wanted to tell. Unless the material showed something inconvenient about the continuity of civilization. Unless the text demonstrated that knowledge thought to be uniquely European existed elsewhere first, or simultaneously, or was inherited from some prior source no one wants to acknowledge. I can't prove the Vatican is hiding Tartarian texts. I can't produce a smoking gun document that says, here lie the secrets of a lost civilization, deliberately suppressed. But I can show you the gaps, the patterns, the absences that are themselves a form of evidence. I can show you inventory lists that reference materials no longer accessible. I can show you architectural achievements that shouldn't exist with the technology officially available. I can show you systematic silences from institutions that otherwise document everything obsessively. And I can ask, why? Why does the Vatican, which preserves medieval shopping lists, which maintains records of minor clerical disputes, which catalogues every theological controversy, have almost nothing substantial about a territory that appears on maps, in encyclopedias, in travel accounts for centuries? Why do technical manuscripts appear with knowledge that shouldn't exist yet? Why do buildings across continents share identical engineering that no blueprint explains? Why does every avenue of research into Central Asian history from this period lead to locked doors, missing files, and professional warnings to stop asking? What would it mean if there were texts, blueprints, technical manuals, maps, historical accounts that demonstrated a level of organizational and technological sophistication that predated or paralleled everything we attribute to the modern era? What would it mean if that knowledge was systematically collected, translated, copied, and then hidden? Not destroyed, hidden. Preserved in the most secure archive in the world, accessible only to those with reasons approved by an institution that has survived 2 millennia by controlling information. What would it mean? I don't have those answers, but I know the questions are worth asking, and I know that somewhere in the Vatican Archive, possibly in sections still closed even to qualified researchers, possibly in subsections that don't appear in public catalogues, there may be answers that change everything we think we know about who built our world and when. The silence around those questions is itself an answer, just not the one they want us to hear.